The first one comes from Ars Technica, and the title here is Year-Long Supply Chain Attack Targeting Security Pros Steals 390,000 Credentials. Wow.
That's non-trivial.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a fascinating story. The deal here is that some baddies have created, I guess what I'll call malicious GitHub repositories that contain legitimate looking code that is intended to, or at least it purports to validate whether or not WordPress login credentials are accurate. And in fact, it actually does that. And so what the adversary here has done is create this, I think there's the multiple GitHub repositories containing different types of tools. And it attracts both other bad guys and red team type people who are looking to assess whether or not the credentials that they've collected are in fact valid. But the thing that happens, which the people using these tools don't understand, is it's also exfiltrating a copy of those credentials to the bad actors that created the repository. And apparently this was going on for the better part of a year, which is how they ended up with 390,000 credentials. It wasn't all in one go. It was, a slow burn over the course of a year.
Yeah, that's wild. They say if the product is free, you're the product. So in this case, you're getting a service. You were just paying for it in a way you didn't understand.
It's a good way to look at it. I like your perspective. Yes, it's good.
Hey, look, people got to eat, as we were just saying earlier.
That's right. So by the way, it's not unprecedented for either bad actors to try to con other bad actors in this way. And it's also not unprecedented for bad actors to try to trick, the good guys. And so I think, this is an interesting play on both of those scenarios, but I think it's a really good reminder that, not everything you find on GitHub is legitimate or good. And just because you're a quote security researcher doesn't mean that you are above the fray and untouchable. So, perhaps you ought to, do a little more due diligence in inspecting what you're using. This certainly could have been a different set of facts where, that you were running malware on your computer that you were thinking was some sort of an exploit proof of concept, which we've seen in the past, right? That's happened in that not so distant past where some enterprising bad guy, creates what looks like what purports to be a proof of concept for some newly released critical vulnerability. And all of the good guys out there are trying to figure out like how this vulnerability works. And so there's a mad dash to go look for proof of concept code. And then, it tends to attract, the corporate-y type and security research type people who are quite willing to run that stuff and can get themselves into trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like this one, I think one of these was hosted in NPM's JavaScript repository. And I'm wondering, we keep seeing this as an attack vector, both for GitHub and PyPy, and, this case, it's the NPM repository, which it's not those companies or those entities' fault that people are using this to post malicious activity. But I'm wondering at some point, if they're going to have to do something to actually have like safe, verified, checked repositories versus like experimental or wild west repositories, and some level of assurance, because I think they're going to get so much reputation damage that could hurt their core business if they're not careful.
I think so. I mean, certainly those have been in the news a lot lately, NPM and PyPy and others. I think the challenge is, for anybody, especially who's worked with, NPM or JavaScript, the average application pulls in like thousands of these libraries. So yeah. I don't know exactly. I'm sure I could probably go easily figure it out, and I didn't do it because that's how I roll. I've got to believe there's like millions of these repositories out there.
Sure.
So I just don't know how feasible it is.
Well, it depends, right? I mean, like Google's trying to do something around this where
Mm-hmm.
you've got safe repos. Your premier static analysis tools or code tools will typically take a container, take it to package, pull apart, understand all these third-party dependencies, and assess those for risk. And one flag could be something like this is a verified known good repo with a verified maintainer that they sign up for. And it's not perfect, right? You could still manipulate it. You could still corrupt it with a supply chain attack, but it's sort of that whole philosophy of some of your anti-phishing or anti-web malware tools saying, wow, this domain you're going to was just registered 5 minutes ago. That's probably a bad sign. So I just wonder if we're going to get to that stage of having to vet some of these packages for some sort of indicator of malicious activity rather than just trusting implicitly everything that's living in GitHub or NPM or wherever. And I drive that more from like I was saying earlier, a reputational hit to those environments. Then I don't blame them. It's not their fault, but they're hosting it and they're serving it. And that comes with an implicit level of trust, whether deservedly or not, that may be challenged if this keeps up.
So I think on the macro scale, I think you're definitely right. For mainstream use of those libraries, absolutely. I think this kind of use case is always going to be a challenge though, because it's people who are looking to use things that probably would never land in a trusted repository just because of the nature of the thing it is. Like, this was
right.
this was kind of a gray area, or it's not a good tool, right? It's intended to help determine whether you have amongst a large set of credentials, whether they're valid or not. So,
well, I think about what have you corrupted, like some of the many tools that are used for this sort of thing, like, John the Ripper or Hashcat or, anything in Kali, like that you're using for red teaming or auditing that once you broke something, surreptitiously sent it to the bad guys. Ooh, that would be nasty. That's kind of what this did. Wow. Yeah. Don't do that if you're a bad guy, please. Just forget I said that.
And if you are if you're a good guy, red teamer, security analyst, just be aware of the risks. Don't get overly confident.
Maybe monitor for your outbound comms when you're running these tools.
Yeah, or that.